All right, thank you everybody for joining our final webinar for the hackathon. This week is working on getting that video recorded, actually presenting your story after using everything you learned in ideation from Lee Sampson, all the market fit and basic financials from Jimmy Gia and Mike Wagoner, and how to craft the story from all that with April Atwood last week. This week it is time to get it all put together. So before we get going, we want to thank, as always, our primary sponsor, the Foster School of Business's Burke Center for Entrepreneurship. They are wonderful. Hopefully you guys have been checking out the resources that they have available for you that were in your orientation guide and have been a few of the weekly emails. We have a bunch of other partners from across the region, many of whom have sent teams to this competition. Tonight's speaker is Srirup Kumar. He is the Community Engagement Officer responsible for operations and partnerships with Impact Bioenergy, a local startup doing some exciting work in, well, I guess we'll call it renewable natural gas, right? I think Srirup, you guys have a different branding for it, and I'll let you get into that in your presentation. But yeah, we are excited to see what Srirup is going to give you guys to help you to parse how to get your presentations together before the deadline next Monday, November 23rd at 12 p.m. I think we're going to go right into the presentation now, and we'll have a few announcements and a wider question and answer period at the end than normal, because I know some of the teams have questions about the one-pager and questions about the video. So, Srirup, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And thanks everyone for joining us this evening. As Brian said, we've been working on our own business here in the region for a few years now, and it's just a privilege to join you all and kind of tell our story from the angle we've gone through. You know, we're really about grassroots and starting from the bottom up. And we were originally founded in 2013, and we're still growing. And I thought I'd take the approach today where we're telling our own story from the impact bioenergy standpoint. I'm trying to give examples, but it's intended more as a back and forth. I've gone through BGI, Bainbridge Graduate Institute. That was the evolution to Presidio Grad School now. So April Atwood, who's also on the line, she was one of my professors, as well as Jimmy Gia. So a couple of the talks you've had are just bring me back to the days I graduated in 2015 from the program here in Seattle. So it's a great kind of reconnection here. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
All right. So hi, yeah, we're Impact Bioenergy, and we manufacture modular anaerobic digesters in King County, and they convert food waste into clean energy and organic plant food. As Brian said, I'm Srirup Kumar, Community Engagement Officer, focused on cooperation and partnerships. And so our tagline over the years has evolved into fueling today with yesterday's food scraps, and that's both literally and figuratively. So today I think I'll go through and give an Andy Raskin pitch based on one of the pieces that Gregory Haller from UW had shared. I'm not sure if anyone had a chance to get through it, but it's a great article, and Elon Musk had gone through and he kind of used that approach to one of his pitches recently. There's a great video if you get a chance to check that out. So I'll just structure my pitch like that, but also, you know, taking time during slides to really show different approaches to that, the rules that Andy Raskin lays out, and then just go through some Q&A here. So rule number one of Andy Raskin was really naming the enemy. So getting out of the gate and just saying really why we're here today. So for us, the enemy here is food waste. You know, there's this tremendous supply of wasted food out there. It's 40%. And we pay handsomely to remove that food waste. And of course, we need to stop wasting it in the first place, you know, reduce edible food. But there's inevitably inedible food. And that really results in today's system in traffic congestion because you're putting on a truck and you're trying to export it. It also results in excessive fuel consumption and all of those externalities associated with that. The dependency with these petrochemicals, as well as imported fuels. So um, imported fuels might have changed over the years. I think now we might even produce more oil and gas domestically. But the point is, it's imported locally. So we're not generating that anywhere close to us. There are all these externalities from the actual pump, if you will, the oil where you actually extract oil to the point of the gas pump, right? So it's called well to wheel type of analysis. And so there are a lot of externalities, and those are really the enemies. So it's a systemic approach here. That's really the enemy. Another way to name the enemy is there's a whole nother way to go at this, is just saying, instead of giving pictures of food waste, is really just laying out some of the facts. You know, 38 million tons of food waste isn't actually consumed every year. And we can actually reclaim all the water that's embedded in that. So there are a lot of other problems associated with it, along with the carbon impacts. So here's another way to paint the picture, along with tying it into other problems. So you have food waste disposal, which is costly in terms of the hauling and the tip fees you're paying, whether it's a landfill or a compost facility. And you have this intensive transportation, carbon intensive transportation that's required to do that. So here's another kind of lens to that, showing trucks and this an actual industry behind synthetic fertilizers. That's also a dual problem, nothing to do with the food waste, but from our angle, through our digesters, we're actually generating a plant food. And so another angle of the problem is really synthetic fertilizers, right? So these are all centralized problems. They're producing about 80% of our nitrous oxide emissions, and that global warming potential is a lot higher than methane, which, you know, today can be substituted. So there is a different approach to painting the picture of the problem. So here I'm not talking about food waste at all, but the actual fertilizer substitutes that we produce, as well as, you know, greenhouse growing in this climate, at least during the winter. That's another problem, which is cost prohibitive in the winter time. So in some of our systems, we are able to integrate the system in order to solve all of these problems, in order to extend you know, greenhouse growing in the wintertime with wasted heat from the system, as well as substitute synthetic fertilizers and avoid food waste disposal. So here's another way of kind of naming the enemy in a systemic approach. But recently, I think just a whole nother angle, just reset on naming the enemy here, you know, the carbon dioxide emissions and our overall impact we're having in our activity. And so if you were to just reset from this angle, we're talking about the macro, of course, long-term 800,000 year lens with this first picture, and just showing how there's a natural ebb and flow to things. But here we are in 2019. I think we're just above that at this point, around 412 or 415, depending on the day. And so the picture to the right is about the monthly figure here. And so you can see that we're still tracking higher, and we know that this is a serious problem. So here's yet another way to really name the enemy here and say that we can change the way we do things. Yet another way here to name the enemy, which in this context, this is really where we're taking the approach these days in terms of community bioenergy projects. The enemy is the way we've approached food recovery and the resources that are embedded in it. So by that, I mean, if you look at this upside down triangle, this is the food recovery hierarchy by the EPA. And of course, at the top, we have source reduction. Are you able to see my mouse right now, by the way? Cool. So source reduction is definitely the first stop. Why are we generating all this food if we can't eat it? And then we, of course, have feeding hungry people. Definitely the best alternative with surplus food, or feed animals if they're close by. We've done pretty good at these three. I think we're getting better and better. And at the state level now, we have a mandate, which is 50% reduction by 2030. And these top 2 points, source reduction and feeding hungry people, will always be the most valuable. And then you kind of have this messy middle area where you have feeding animals. Of course, animals aren't always close by. And then you have industrial uses. So providing waste oils for rendering and fuel consumption, and food scraps for digestion to recover energy, water, and carbon. Unfortunately, we don't have access to those industrial uses. So we do either hop over that to composting, which is great, but unfortunately, the compost facilities are nowhere near the source of the food waste. And so you'll notice in the composting of the arrow coming over to this map here, and this is an example of Vashon Island, which generates somewhere around 1,000 tons per year of food waste. All of that gets exported, long haul truck, about 50 miles away, 46 miles to Cedar Grove. And then the compost is actually sent back to island in a lot of situations. So in this situation, composting is good, but not a great use of resources if we have to put in all these ton miles. So a ton mile is one way we've learned to tell the story, which is essentially moving 1 ton 1 mile. And it's extremely energy intensive, and folks in trucking might appreciate it a little bit more, but this is why diesel is used, because it's a really energy dense fuel. So you can do a lot of ton miles without using a lot of liquid fuel. The problem with this is that there are too many externalities that we're finally seeing. And so the enemy is really a lack of access. If you think about it, it's not necessarily people wasting food or the system. It's just no one's really provided access. And I think that's a key way to get at a root problem and solution, is showing that today in today's market, the customers aren't happy for a reason, because they don't have access to this type of either technology or product, or the entire life cycle behind that. They want a product, but they don't have an alternative that is maybe a lower carbon alternative, or a more sustainable organic alternative. So in this way, we're telling a completely different story and naming the enemy here, but we can really say why now. So in this situation, I just wanted to get into a bit about where we are in the pandemic. And I think it's important to really put things in context to what's been going on lately, I guess. And without a doubt, the pandemic is definitely the biggest ongoing tragedy in my lifetime, at least. But as Vice President-elect Kamala Harris mentioned recently, it's really been an accelerant. The pandemic has accelerated a lot of things. And that's on a lot of levels: economically, environmentally, socially, and personally. It's accelerated a lot of things. And we can leverage that in our stories. And so here is a picture of in Delhi, the India Gate, and it's a pre-COVID and post-COVID picture of it, just the air quality. And what we can see happens is that it gets super, super clear. And for the first time, people are able to breathe this clean air. So I think using anecdotes like this, I think this is a side-by-side pre-post pandemic shot that really sets the stage on why, for example, EV stocks, electric vehicle stocks, have been skyrocketing recently. It's because this is so much more relevant now, what we've been doing, how we've been transporting ourselves and things. We don't realize it, but we're filling our air with particulate matter. So that's one way to kind of use recent anecdotes, but I encourage you to link it back to the pandemic and figure out how these flaws in the system are now teased out due to the pandemic. Andy Raskin's rule number 3 here is the promised land. And so in our context, just moving along, we would show this circular economy. And so I think the circular economy is in zero waste world is really the holy grail in terms of perpetuating the use of things. And so this infograph is a circular bioeconomy that's developing on Vashon. And we've developed this over the years, in particular with the community on Vashon, Zero Waste Vashon, and the farmers, the land trust, they're forayed into farming. So the agricultural landscape is a lot more robust. But King County is actually a huge partner of ours from the beginning. And they're included in the system because they've actually enabled us in a way. A few years ago, we got some grants from them to really demonstrate our system, or at least do a feasibility study to demonstrate the system. And the common goal really is diversion, of course, for King County. They have mandates for zero waste of resources by 2030. And it's a fantastic goal. That's really the North Star. And it's one of the most aggressive goals, I think, in the nation. And so, in our region, we really are blessed with the leaders who've kind of set the chart on where we can go. And so we do have the composting at a regional scale because of that. We also know what the unintended consequences are from that due to that type of approach. And so King County, by mandating zero waste by 2030, they know that there needs to be more solutions than centralized ones. And in this situation, we've linked up the stakeholders on island. So Vashon Bioenergy Farm is our community scale project that we've cobbled together, and we're in the process of commissioning now. That's located at Island Spring Organics Tofu Factory. It's on Vashon. So that's right here at the top. And so they're basically the food processor. We are on the same site here, but the food processor could really be any other entity on island as well. So whether you're school district or food bank, it's the generators of the waste. So in this infograph, we're just recycling it locally. We're upgrading it to ORNG, that's Organic Renewable Natural Gas, Orange. Orange is our brand for our net negative carbon fuel. And that fuel is made from digesting the organics on island. And so in this case, there's a life cycle analysis being done. We are expecting a negative 20 to 30% perhaps on the life cycle there. That's compared to diesel, which is about 100. So I'll get into the metrics in a moment, but this branding of the fuel is one thing we found that you really need to tell the story around it and show its use, because folks won't really understand or get it until you're actually showing it. So in our case, that's one of the products. Another product is this PBF, probiotic food for plants. And that's the co-product of the system coming out. It's a certified organic tofu factory. So we have a certifiable organic product coming out of that, going to the land trust farm where they regrow food and bring it back to the market. And so this is the vision, to have this circular economy on island. and essentially the promised land. We're not there yet, but there has to be some sort of North Star. So the next rule, number 4, and I should probably stop to take questions because I'm gone quite a while. So does anyone have questions on the first 3 rules here? So to recap, we had naming the enemy, and then answer why now, and then the promised land. Feel free to chime in if anyone
And
has.
if any team wants to get a little coaching on these topics for your own project, now would be the time. Yeah, sure. You want to go over those 3 again, just so people can
Sure.
see how it might apply to them?
Sure. So in this case, Andy Raskin's rule number 1, name the enemy. So, how are you framing the problem? In this case, it's a systemic problem. We're trying to provide access in our situation. So access to industrial use, which in turn provides more access to feed hungry people. Then rule number 2 is, why now? And the question, we're answering here now. Our answer is really because the pandemic has shown so many ways, whether you're showing here about air quality index or other problems that the pandemic has shown, such as our food system inequality. I was just linking it back to the pandemic and how it's been an accelerant. So why now? There are some obvious answers. And then number 3 is the promised land. Is where do you think you can help, and what is that vision? There are a couple more rules coming up. Should I just move along then?
It looks like where is Liam? You should be able to unmute yourself, Liam. Got a
Yep. Can you hear
question
me?
over here. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think you just answered my question, but I was gonna say the promised land, that's essentially what you're implementing, how that would affect what's going on, and like how that would help. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah. So there's a link that I can share in the text from Andy Raskin's talk. And yeah, you're basically painting a picture of why you believe your product or solution will make a difference.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
For sure. Anyone else?
Cool.
All right, so moving
Can I take
along.
his? Yeah.
Andy Raskin, rule number 4 here is overcoming the obstacles. And so in our situation, it was really about demonstration. And so with King County, with Washington State Department of Commerce, Clean Energy Fund, and Washington State Housing Finance Commission, it was about showing that promised land and saying we could solve multiple things, multiple problems by working together on this. So pictured here is Zero Waste Vashon, and Jan Allen, our founder, as well as myself during our ribbon cutting on Vashon, and that was made possible. On the right, you'll see the sources there from our stakeholders, and so overcoming the obstacles in our case, it's about cobbling together the resources and the capital, and just starting to show a new process or a new product, MVP, if you will. So minimum viable product is something that I think everyone can strive towards, but depending on what your business is, it could be easy or really difficult. In our case, it was really difficult because we needed an entire system built to show the MVP in a way. So this is a community scale of our minimum whole product, minimum viable whole product here, and actually demonstrating that, overcoming obstacles today, using food waste and showing where, from a user standpoint, you put into a bin, but they don't see how necessarily valuable a system could be. So showing that it's not such an obstacle, you put it in your bin just like you do today, and then it's out of sight, out of mind. You're just not hauling it off island, 40 to 50 miles away. It's going right down the street. And then you're able to generate, a gasoline gallon equivalent of this net negative fuel, where branding is orange, as well as this 7 gallons of the organic plant food here that we're branding as the PBF. So partnering up with Matsuda Farm and Land Trust, that was a huge obstacle for us, because demonstrating the value of the actual plant food, that's always been a barrier, because it's a new type of product. People know compost, and of course they know they're off the shelf Miracle Grow and whatnot, but they don't know a digestate, which is an anaerobically digested food waste. They don't know what it does in their garden. So those are huge obstacles for us that we've overcome by partnering with the end users. And so Land Trust on Vashon Island, they forayed into farming, and they acquired Matsuda Farm, and they started building this farm to school pipeline on island. And here they are importing their compost onto island, importing other fertilizers. And we said, look, we're located about 1,500 feet from you as the crow flies, and we're generating this rich product. We're looking to prove it out. And how can we solve some of your pain points? They're a small farm with water issues on island. They have access to a small irrigation pond, but they don't have their own well. And so water is another issue that we could help them with, potentially avoiding the drilling of another water well on site. Instead, we substitute there. You can see a bulk tank. We have a 5,000 gallon bulk tank that we have feeding their farm now. And we're hoping to set up over the winter for drip irrigation. So it's an integrated system. And so in our case, this was a huge obstacle, and we were able to overcome it by partnering with this, with the community and the stakeholders to say, I can supply something to you that substitutes from these really intensive other things that you're using. But until you actually use it, they won't really believe you. It takes some demonstration and partnering to a degree. And so that's on the biofertilizer angle. And this is just some more mapping on how to overcome some of the obstacles here. I think a lot of them, showing that you can generate local jobs in the circular economy and be resilient, be more self-sufficient. I think there has been an obstacle to education there for us. And in the end, it's all about the next rule, presenting the evidence. So overcoming the obstacles is one thing, but once you have some sort of evidence that will help you solve in the former, potentially overcoming some of those first obstacles. In our case, there's plenty of data out there now on this net negative carbon fuel that's out there. And so this kind of speaks to charts, like how do you pull together maybe some charts that tell the story in multiple ways. This is thanks to California Air Resource Board. So we didn't make this chart, but we just knew where to go for it. And this is the carbon intensity values of current certified pathways of fuel, any fuel for transportation use. And so if you look at this chart, they've mapped all sorts of different pathways here. Just taking a proxy for diesel here, mentioned earlier for ton mileage, diesel is about 100 on this chart, and that's 100 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. And that's basically the parity, what we're trying to go against. And there are all sorts of alternative fuels. There's many ways to make hydrogen Every one of those ways has a different life cycle. Renewable gasoline or electricity, there are lots of different ways to generate electricity. Some of them are still generating a lot of carbon. So if you're using solar, for example, solar power to generate electricity, this is still generating maybe 30 or so, 30 to 40 maybe grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, even though you're using solar energy to charge a vehicle. That can go negative depending on what you're using to generate the electricity. And in our case, a bio-based fuel, bio LNG or bio CNG, is proven as the most potent net negative transportation fuel. And this is all third-party certification. So it's really important to look at your secondary research here. So there's primary research, which is research that you're going to do as a company because you can't find that research out there. Hopefully you don't have to do all that. Hopefully you can rely on the secondary research, which this is, and that helps prove your case. And in the end, it's a bit too much for a company to bite off anyways. So in this case, you have a negative 400 or even less than that for bio CNG. So here's evidence that's showing here we have a way to produce fuel. It's not about technical viability. It's not about feasibility or economic feasibility. It's just about access. So for us, here's the evidence we're now presenting, and we're producing this fuel on Vashon, and I think that's going to help us to scale in terms of that product at least, and that use towards a commercially viable net negative fuel. Any questions on that, on presenting evidence? I think there can be many different forms of it, but in this case, found this to be pretty potent because of the latest science.
Sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Karan.
Thanks. I have a quick question on showing evidence. So our specific idea is not related to any new technology. It's more just connecting buyers and sellers in a marketplace for, so we were specifically thinking about like sustainable clothing, since it's very difficult right now for buyers to find brands other than the few very large ones. So in terms of evidence beyond, we can do some like primary research, as you said, like polling some people about whether they would be willing to use this service. But when there's no new technology involved, basically, what sort of evidence is useful to show to investors?
So you're replacing a current production process, though. Is that right?
So we're not really replacing any processes. We're creating sort of a marketplace for buyers to be connected with sellers.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as doing some degree of due diligence on behalf of the buyers. So there'll be sorting through the various certifications, since there's so many, and people who are not incredibly involved purchasers might not know the difference between them. So.
Got it.
Well, you get kind of the best of all worlds then, because you can grab the evidence from the various products that you're carrying, or you can just go general about how being sustainable with shirts or being sustainable with shoes and what the difference would be, how big the market is, X megatons of carbon a year, that kind of thing. You've got a wide latitude to play around with there. So I guess this kind of goes back to market fit. If you think about who are the people that you're trying to reach, you're going to want to speak to the data points that they care about. So you want to figure out what turns them into a motivated buyer in your case, compared to buying it from somewhere else.
Yeah, I was going to say
That's how
comparing
I
those
would feel about it.
processes. Yeah. Kind of the A/B.
Does that make sense?
Yep, that does great. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Hey, April.
Yeah, I had a quick question on that. I wonder if negative evidence could be helpful. So for if you're connecting people to more sustainable options, right? Probably you've run across evidence about what problems exist in the current approaches, like how do people find it now? And there's like like I would marshal evidence about that's kind of explaining the current problem too, but sort of demonstrating or illustrating using whatever data you can find to say, people who try these approaches, here's all the problems with that, or here's how ineffective it is, or how inefficient it is, or how much, what lack of credibility is built in that situation. So I was thinking like negative evidence.
Right. Pointing out the problems with the current process.
Heather had a question too, but I think I'm not reading it right. I'm not understanding it exactly. Heather, do you want to just throw that out there?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is if you're trying to convince investors into why your idea is good, you need to convince them that people will use technology. So if you say, here's evidence that people actually, 5 million people will, or whatever it is, will tend to use this type of technology, that would be another line of evidence in my mind, in addition to the benefits of the thing you're trying to get people to click on.
Right.
Right, quite right.
I don't know what kind of technology platform you're planning to use, but how effective that particular platform is or could be.
Yeah, you can show how other online shopping platforms are effective. That's the functional side. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Anybody else have any questions or any comments on that? All right.
All right, moving along.
We're back
then.
to you, Srirup.
Okay. Then the next slide is mostly on presenting financials, not necessarily on the product side, but we just talked about, if you're pitching your actual business case, there has to be some sort of financial legitimacy behind it and a return that's not, something like the hockey stick that normally is shown so much in investment in pitches where you can actually show, of a more, in the end, I think zero waste is a lot about materials. So it's not like clicks and, online software, cloud computing, a lot of high tech companies that will just take off. So I guess doing the modeling, I just had a slide here on how to present what we found effective way of showing the evidence in the business case and the financial return is to have basically 3 simple lines charted. One would be, your revenues at the top line, and then your expenses charted basically right next to them. So you have your revenues in one color, in this case orange, and your expenses in red, and with your net revenue in green. And it, just telling the whole story in one chart was the goal with this image. I think that's more along the lines of telling your financial story and the evidence behind why your product would actually break even and beyond that. Here we have a general, in this case, presenting our evidence at various levels of the spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, we have a very small system known as a horse, and on the other end, we have the Nautilus. And there's about a 80x scale up between these systems. And so showing the evidence of the use cases, I think that's another key part of this, is showing where your technology is applicable. In our case, it can be designed for corporate campuses or universities, as well as larger farms or communities like Vashon. And so presenting those cases, those business cases in both the small scale and larger scale, and then how they link back to these meaningful local jobs. In the end, a lot of the evidence is in how you're able to connect the dots and add more value locally to have these multiplying effects. And so a lot of zero waste business plans, they might involve conversion, but it's not necessarily local. So if you're working on something that has a local impact in making jobs, then definitely would stress that and actually show how many jobs you would be creating with your business plan. In this case, also more evidence is that on a small footprint of citing a system for us. And so in this case, it's about a 3,000 square foot system pictured here, but it can be scaled down to about 20-foot container, as showed in this previous slide here. So, having use cases is key, and in our case, there's no one size fits all, basically. On another end, in terms of odor and vector control, that's another evidence that we're bringing to the table in terms of organics management these days. So for us, it was the ability to control odors. In this case, a tofu factory that is responsible for a lot of complaints on island because of odor. We've been able to show over the past year that we can actually control that odor, because in the end, those are methane emissions. And you're actually controlling the vectors associated to those odors as well. So vector attraction such as whether it's rats or seagulls, food waste has a vector control issue. And so having evidence behind that has been critical for us too, and having this value add production. So this is all kind of a systemic evidence that we're showing, but presenting that is definitely, an enabler. Any questions on this slide?
It's a great photo. That's
Thanks.
promotion gold. Yeah.
I think you might be in there somewhere, Brian. I don't know if you made it up for that.
No, I didn't make it to that one. Wish I had.
So moving on, that's basically all I had for content, but I just wanted to open it up for some talks. I had some other links to share as well. There is a great one on how leaders inspire action. It's a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. Gregory Heller, he had a great blog he wanted to share on some information. And then there's a whole email list that maybe, Brian, I'm sure Brian, April had a whole bunch of other great resources to share on links. But yeah, at this point, I just wanted to thank you all and open it up to questions.
Cool. Thank you, Srirup. All right. Any follow-up questions for any aspect of the presentation? The floor is open. April, go ahead.
Covered a lot there, but
I just realized you've got your hand raised.
I do. I was looking in the reactions, but I couldn't find the right reaction to sort of raise my hand.
Oh, yeah.
So a couple of things I noticed as I was listening to Srirup's approach. So the rule number 4, overcoming obstacles. So it's sort of showing how you overcame obstacles, how your company overcomes obstacles, but also one of those was showing people who are going to be feeding into the system how this is no harder than what you're doing right now. So taking the customer perspective as well as the company perspective and thinking about obstacles, right?
Yes, that's a great point. Yeah, in our
Good.
case, we kind of had to demonstrate both cases, as if we are ourselves an owner operator, so a customer ourselves, trying to act like a customer. In the end, they call it, eating your own dog food in a way. We have to be able to, use our own system and get it right before opening it up. But from a customer standpoint of each and every product, there's so many obstacles they have to use the independent co-products coming out of a system. So whether it's the lens of owning a system or the lens of just using the plant food or using the renewable energy, it's really about showing all of those scenarios and showing how we can solve and address them.
Right. I mean, you can address it from the company perspective and say, okay, here's the obstacles that we've had to overcome, and here's how we've designed our system to be optimal for us. But if it's not usable from your customer's perspective, then it doesn't matter, right? Because they're not going to interact. They're not going to end up signing on with you. So I liked that kind of broadening of making sure the customer's view is in mind too, along with as you design. The other thing, and it's kind of related, was for the presenting evidence, what you talked about at the end, the different use cases and the local jobs and thinking about odor control. And it's like, okay, it's really obvious that your company you spent time thinking ahead about what kinds of arguments are people going to raise. And then you show how you've already thought about that and you've got a solution for it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's been huge.
Yeah. So I, when I talked to the group last time, I said, just talk to people. And like so when people come up with, oh, this would be a problem for me, or that would be a problem for me, or here's why I don't think it would work. That's really valuable, right? Because then you can,
yeah, that's, I would say the most valuable part, April. That's a fantastic point. I feel like talking to customers and market sounding, that's the most important part of this. We've spoken to hundreds of customers across the board, in whether you're talking about customers of a system or customers of those products that a system generates. So yeah, that's really going to be your guiding principles there, what the customer wants.
Srirup, I'm curious, in going through that process for impact, how did you guys compile that information? It's sort of a cliche in some businesses, more traditional businesses in the past, to have kind of a talking points, a sales and marketing manual, a talking points manual. And that's usually where that customer feedback goes eventually. Sometimes it'll, depending on what phase you're in, it might get routed to the director of product, right? Because you're seeking feedback about the product, and then they're going to improve the product and iterate on it. How did you guys go about that for impact?
So we started with, spreadsheets and, traditional ways of just tracking things. But in the end, we needed a better way to intake information from customers, organize it in a more automated way. So using customer development tools to track, conversations, deals that are, just starting to really understand what the customer wants. I think having intake forms for them to fill out and share information with us. Then it really comes down to triaging internally. So, in our weekly staff meetings, we would spend some time revisiting, what have customers really brought to the forefront in the past few weeks, and what seemed to be the real barrier to, the next iteration of this product or whatnot. So it's really about revisiting the market feedback constantly with the team. For us, we're a really lean, scrappy team, so we don't have a whole hierarchy of product managers and whatnot. So it's really a judgment call in the end about market sounding and pivoting the business if you need to meet certain needs. But you really have to be, I think, agnostic. We've taken that approach. We've taken the agnostic to not making a square peg fitting around a hole type of thing, where we can adapt certain things to a customer's need and continually improve the product. But in the end, you can't solve all the problems, so you have to know when something isn't really your core business, and you're not going to pivot as much as it would change the way you do your business as it is today into something where you'd have a whole laundry list of things dictated by your customers to take care of. We'd rather kind of take more of an organic forming of introducing. It's almost like in software development where you introduce a release and you have these sprints. So you would introduce a viable release, but then sprint with the customer to say, does this make sense for what you need? And then you find a certain point where no, it doesn't.
That's cool. Hopefully all the teams just took that in really well. We'll serve them well. Any other questions from any of the teams? Anybody on the call tonight? Okay. Thank you very much, Srirup. That was great. I think that was a really good case study.
Cool. Thank you all for having me.
Yeah. Appreciate you. We are going to have the recording up tomorrow morning, but before we get into the tail end here, I wanted to open it up to Q&A more generally about the submission requirements for next week for the one-pager and the 5-minute video. That one-pager is designed to help you organize your thinking with regards to your 5-minute video presentation, which is the primary product that you're going to deliver for the competition. You can also submit the one-pager if you wish. It is not required. It is not required, but it will be helpful for the judges if you've got a one-pager and a video. And if you can take advantage of both platforms, you can probably fit a little more information in. So I would urge you to consider submitting the one-pager with your 5-minute video. I know, Ashley, your team had some specific questions. If you're okay going over them right now, so we can talk about them as a group and see if anybody else has questions. Otherwise, we can do it with your team after the call if you'd rather not do it with the entire cohort. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm happy we can ask questions now. That's fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, the floor is all yours. Go ahead.
So the initial guidelines seem to indicate that the one-pager was a required submission piece, and we were wondering around the level of detail that should be included in that. But since you just said that that's not required, I'm wondering about the level or what sort of documentation should we be providing in conjunction with our video submission?
You don't have to provide anything else other than the video. The video is the bare minimum. If you want to also submit the one-pager, that makes it a little easier for the judges to parse your submission. But yeah, like I said, not required. You could, I mean, there are two different approaches. Ideally, the video is primarily going to be derivative from the work that you put together in the one-pager. Hopefully most teams are well along in their one-pager, if not already in the can, and are now turning their attention to figuring out how they want to convert that messaging into a video format.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
I would have to say that a one pager is going to be, even if it's optional, I still think it's super important. Inviting the judges, I did say, you know, review the video and the one pager from the teams. And I know how people are, judges behave, you know, they're going to be busy trying to absorb your video, but if they have that one pager, that will help them see you better, if you know what I mean. So I would not do a one pager, even if it's optional. I would do it. It'll give you a leg up in the judging, I think.
Without question. Yeah. Okay. We've gotten feedback from a few teams that are they're feeling the pressure in the COVID era. So we disconnected that one pager from the video for those teams that are not feeling like they can turn out both. But yeah, like Heather said, if you can, much of it is the same work. So it'd be kind of silly not to, if you've already got all that work done.
A specific question also, we're including just some figures that we think are pretty compelling, and we're wondering if you wanted to see cited sources from where those came from.
Well, okay. So in the scoring, the financials are not as valuable as the other areas, as you may have noticed in the judging guidelines. That was intentional because we don't expect you to have really solid financials. There just hasn't been enough time, if you've begun this program, coming up with an idea, starting to do the market fit, and then attack the very basic financials to really be able to go out and do serious amount of market research, even primary or secondary research, to get numbers that can provide more than a sense of whether your project is crazy or not crazy. That's the goal of the exercise. Can this ever make money? Is this something we should continue thinking about doing after this competition, or is it just a really bad idea that we're going to lose money on? If the answer is yes, this thing can make money, you've succeeded. You've succeeded in terms of the competition. In terms of documentation, you know, you could conceivably probably fit that kind of stuff into the one pager, but it's not a lot of real estate. You know, it'll be a little difficult to be doing footnotes, that kind of thing. It really depends on what the documentation is, how quickly and easily you can communicate that these numbers are backed up by whatever authority you want to cite. In a video, it's easy to say those things. In the one pager, I think you're actually going to have more difficulty squeezing it into the one pager than you would into the video. But you could also try to put some pieces into one part of it and other pieces into the other part of it. The other advantage of having that one pager submitted.
Well, also, I'd like to say, when I do presentations or one pagers, what I do is I slip the citation very teeny weeny right at the bottom of the figure. So I just basically incorporate into the graphic itself, and I don't, like, if it's a long URL, I just use like, let's say it's from a newspaper or some journal article, I'll just use the actual, you need to make sure you're giving attribution to the source. You don't have to get all that particular if you don't have room, but slip it in teeny tiny into the bottom of the graphic. And if it's a number that you're citing, then maybe you can do it as a link, hyperlink it. But from credibility point of view, I'm coming at this as a scientist. If you don't have things cited, it does ding against you. You really do want to prove your credibility. I didn't notice, Srirup, if you had your things cited or not in your slides. But I always tell people, if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation, make sure you have attribution for everything on there, including, by the way, photos and graphics, because people in the design world get very upset when they feel like their photos and things are being used without the attribution. So they're pretty sensitive about that.
Yes, totally
It-
agreed. I tried to include whatever third-party references. I had the CNN picture there and the CARB resources. But yeah, if there are any other third-party materials, I would definitely add some sort of credit there.
Yeah, definitely don't troll around the internet ripping off other people's creative material without citing it. But remember, this is a pitch. This is not, you're not presenting at a conference or something here. And you've only got 5 minutes, which is a little bit more than your elevator pitch, right? It's a couple elevator pitches. So
Brian?
you
Brian?
don't need to cite the numbers for the business as much as to have a good sense of them and what are the types of sources that people can get more information at. Because again, we don't expect you to have fully developed financials at this point. This program is only 4 weeks long. So, we don't need a spreadsheet showing, every last bit of it. But you want to have numbers that make sense. Like Srirup was mentioning in his presentation, something like that shows this is how much we think it costs. This is how much we think we can charge. This is how much we think we can make. In 5 years, we'll break even. That kind of stuff. That has to be solid. You have to have a good sense of that. Everybody, like Srirup mentioned, everybody wants to have the hockey stick curve. Everybody tries to pitch a hockey stick, and nobody really believes it. Just try to be practical about what you've actually learned. April, go ahead. You wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ashley, it sounds like you've got some numbers that are really supportive. And so that's awesome. That's a huge strength. And you want to be able to demonstrate you're not just making those up, that they actually came from someplace dependable. So yes, I would.
Yeah, if you've got
more like Heather, it's like, yeah, it'd be good to cite teeny tiny printing on a one pager can do it for citations.
Yeah.
One of the numbers that we were thinking of is just the amount of waste from one industry that's going to landfills. And that's something that maybe in our video, we might say, according to the EPA, XYZ.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You don't need to flash the citation across the screen. Don't do that. But if you want to put it in the white one pager and you want to give the URL to the source, absolutely. Yeah. Do any of the other teams have any questions about the one pager or the video production? Any of the other requirements? Raskin.
Hi. Not specifically the one pager, but our team is not entirely sure about the exact costs of everything, and we don't want to just guess. And at this point, we're somewhat running out of time, and we're not entirely sure what we should do.
So this is Syed's. Is this the traffic auto salvage one?
Oh no, we went beyond the traffic idea.
Oh great. Where did you guys end up?
Currently the idea is going into a campus, putting these recycling storage stations, like 3 or 4 bins, and you would scan. You have your phone. You would scan the bin to open up an app, and the app would tell you which item you put each of your things in, and it would give you points. And you can use those points to, get a coupon or something at a store, so that you could partner with stores. And the whole idea of this idea is that you would incentivize people to recycle because you would basically get a reward of points. And it also just increases the number of items recycled. And because it's all sorted, because people are now incentivized to also sort it, it saves a whole bunch of money, because it costs a lot of money to sort recyclables in a material recovery facility.
Okay.
So,
well, and so what is the piece you're you're worried about finding numbers on or developing numbers on?
Well, I guess the cost of setting up the bins, making the bins, programming the app for the scanning, who would do the pickup, that kind of stuff.
Well, and yeah, this is a big research project. I mean, you might have to go out to plastics.com to see how much they charge for a plastic bin that you might use for that purpose. Or are you going to use little metal things with bags under it to collect? I mean, what are we talking about? You can probably find something similar to what you need there in terms of all the other costs. You're just going to have to go out on the internet and find the best take on that you can find and go with it. It's all a little bit of guesswork at the very beginning, right? People come up with a new idea, they need to go out and determine the cost structure for things that may have never really thought about before, right? So you just got to get creative in finding the pricing. Where does the stuff even come from? Who knows? You're gonna know. You're gonna find out. That's your project, right? I mean, that's how you put the company together. You got to find the things that you need. In terms of programming, you know, if you go out to websites like Upwork and others, you can figure out how much it takes to contract somebody for a typical development project. And if you shop around, look around in there, browse around in there, see what the going rate is for
Upwork.
Yeah, Upwork.com. Yeah,
Upwork.
but there are others. Just do the best you can. You know, that's the thing. Today is the iteration that it's a summation of everything you came up with so far, and tomorrow it's going to be a little bit better, right? Just do the best you can. It's always going to change. But don't freak about it. You know, don't freak about, oh my God, I don't know exactly what this is. You can put an asterisk by that number, right? I think it was I think Jimmy and Mike both spoke to that in terms of basic financials, right? Really zoom in and lock down the things that you can be sure of, and then if there's something you're not sure of, then highlight it or star it or something. Like, we think this is about right, but we're still researching it. That's also an acceptable answer.
Also call a few people. I needed to do a grant
there you go.
a few years ago for, and we were going to do an app. And so I just called a few people and I found out that a pretty complicated app would cost 20K. A simple one would cost 5K. So, you know, if you call a few folks and say, hey, if I was going to do this, give me a ballpark of what it would be. They're happy to tell you the ballpark.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Cool.
I gotta show you something.
For our video recordings, do you have a preference on wanting us to share, let's say, like a PowerPoint, or maybe just focusing on like our faces and just talking through it? Do you have a preference on that?
It's entirely up to you. Whatever the final product that you feel that you can deliver the best.
Okay.
The approach that you think will help sell your pitch to Elon Musk or whoever.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. There are many, many ways to skin this. All right. Any other questions? Okay. I think I am going to wrap up for the evening then here. Whoops, there. Thank you again to Srirup. That was a great presentation. I'm sure everybody took something away from it that they'll be able to apply directly into their video submission. His email is on the slide at the lower right, and it'll be out there for you guys in the recap email tomorrow.
Yes,
As
thanks for
always,
having me. And best of luck, everyone.
thanks. As always, I want to give a shout out to our incredible hackathon support team: Kelly Farmer, Marco Giulli, Lisa Monroe, Morissette Alvarez, and Adam Kubota. And if there are any follow-up questions, you can always feel free to reach out to us. I think you guys have seen this slide a lot, so you know where to find us. One last thing that I would like to add too is that if people are getting stuck, please reach out to us. If you're having trouble producing the video, if you just you don't know where to begin, you're getting stuck on one particular piece, you're having technical problems, whatever it is, reach out to us so that we can connect you up with a resource to help you get unstuck. And with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and good luck in your production week.